This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Sahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellowwall podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 449 of the Yellowwallpod. I'm your host Stefan Butzko, and today we will talk about Borussia Dortmund are one more game away from winning the championship after beating FC Augsburg 3-0 in Augsburg. First win on the road in 6 attempts, or 7 that is. And of course Bayern Munich did lose to RB Leipzig, which all made that possible. So we'll talk about that and have to preview the game against Mainz. And Mats Hummels did extend his contract for 1 more year. So that's another topic we will have on the agenda. Other than that, I don't know what else to talk about, but I feel like this is plenty to discuss. So with me here today for this very exciting episode, Lars Perlman. Hello, Lars. How are you doing?
Hello, Stefan. Whenever it gets exciting, you get the most excitable panel together, I suppose. So I'm doing quite well. Thank you, Stefan.
Yeah, so before I introduce Matthias, Lars, while we're on the subject, on the Lars Perlman excitement scale, how high are we right now?
What's
the max?
That's what I was going to say. As high as
Is it
gets,
like 1?
so perhaps a 6 out of 7 or whatever. No, I don't know. Quite honestly, I'm not that worried yet. I think there will be a time on Saturday, few minutes before kickoff, when I do get a bit shaky. But generally speaking, I'm not that kind of a flappable football fan, so I think I'll be all right.
All right. Well, I asked you about your excitement, not so much about the anxiety. That's a whole nother subject we can get into. But also here, of course, Matthias Zug. Hello, Matthias. Sorry for having asked more important questions first, Lars, but how are you doing? What's your excitement scale?
Oh, it's, apparently I'm so old, according to one person on Twitter, that, I've been there, done that. No, I'm extremely excited, and I realized it as the match was building up until the 58th minute. That's when I realized just how damn tense I was the whole time. But I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah. Tense is a good word. I want to say I'm very positive. Actually, I've been really excited, and maybe the anxiety will creep in at some point with the opening whistle, probably at the very latest. But I'm very positive. I honestly can't wait for Saturday to be here, and I'll be honest, I haven't slept well since Sunday because I've been lying awake imagining certain things like Marco Reus lifting the Meisterschale into the Dortmund sky and all these kind of things that go along with it, because it is very real now, and the trust in this team, I want to say, is pretty high, especially in a home game against Mainz, who have little things to do. But maybe we should start chronologically, and I don't know if we need to start with the Bayern game, Lars. I leave that up to you a little, but if you don't want to start there, start with the Augsburg game. What are your thoughts on that weekend?
I mean, seeing as I did not watch the Bayern game, both because of, I guess, trying to voodoo myself into causing Bayern's defeat, and also just because I don't usually enjoy watching them. I guess we have to start with the Dortmund game. You asked earlier about my level of excitement / anxiety. I have to say I wasn't really particularly worried about the game on Sunday, because despite what maybe public opinion or whatever wants to tell us about Dortmund over the last few years, they've been excellent this season. Whenever Bayern have dropped points, they've won all their games on the same match days. I think it's now 5 wins after or on the same match day as Bayern's 5 defeats, and it's like a combined score of 18 to 2 goals, if I'm not mistaken, something like that anyway. So I was sort of quite convinced that Dortmund would not miss that penalty, if you like, with Bayern losing on Saturday and then having
That's a very German way to say it in English.
yeah. Missing a sitter would perhaps be better. I think in this case, people might remember that Sebastian Kehl and a few others of Dortmund were complaining a bit about the scheduling of the last few match days in the Bundesliga, seeing as Dortmund always had to play after Bayern. We now see that there might be an advantage in that, and I think Sebastian Haller said the same in an interview with Sportbild on Wednesday. I think it definitely helped them knowing that 180 minutes and you have destiny in your own hands. So I think I was quite convinced of a win before, as I said, but I was actually surprised at how well they played. Given the circumstances, I think it was arguably the best away performance since I don't know when. I think some people made the argument that they played well against Bochum, but didn't have the luck of the draw / refereeing decisions. But scoring goals and taking your chances is kind of an important part in football. So in that term, first half really good, not taking their chances. That happens. Forced a red card, which I think was kind of harsh, but some Augsburg players and personnel didn't really dispute it. So who am I to make the argument that wasn't a red card? And then I think in the second half against 10 men, kind of felt like an inevitability of their scoring, and ultimately they did with Sebastian Haller, real striker's moment of genius, making use of an individual error by a defender, and then I think once Dortmund had opened the floodgates, I guess even the most pessimistic of fans will have been reasonably optimistic, although the 10-15 minutes after the first goal were quite nervy, and there was this one counterattack or long ball chance for Augsburg, which Kobel saved quite brilliantly. But I think even within the game, the reaction to those nervy moments was very positive, and ultimately I think in that kind of must-win situation to come out with a 3-0 win against a side that is quite difficult to play against, hasn't lost a lot of home games all season long, is quite the statement from Dortmund. So definitely a strong performance in a very important situation, and that's something that we haven't always been able to say about Dortmund.
Yeah, before I add my mustard to stay in the English vein, Matthias, what are your thoughts on that game? I'm fairly certain we will both echo a lot of what Lars just said, but nevertheless, since it's an important game, I don't mind hearing the same thing twice, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it was the most complete away performance in a very long time. Like Lars said, Bochum away was a good performance, but at the end of the day, you only got a point.
And the second half wasn't as good.
Correct. Here you got all 3 points against a team that we all know has been a bit of a thorn in the side for Dortmund away from home for a number of seasons. Yeah, I mean, the red card, I also looked at it and went, ooh, that's a little tight to call that. I mean, if Udokai would have been truly, like, clearly last man, sure, but it was really tight. I don't know about it. And the thing, though, is about that, of course, it made it harder for Dortmund for the longest time because, I mean, it was the ultimate bus parking job that Augsburg did then, and there just weren't spaces there. Terzic said as much after the match, that it made it really hard. I mean, it was a more open match for Dortmund prior to the red card because Augsburg, unlike in previous years, don't just hoof it long all the time. They try to play out of the back. They try to play football. That being said, completely deserved and dominant victory. When I looked at the numbers afterwards, I was actually surprised. I didn't realize it was quite that dominant. Kobe had to make a single save, whereas Kubek had to make 7 and then conceded 3. And Kubek, I thought, actually played well, unlike the first time I remember seeing Kubek against Dortmund, where he looked very not good. And, seeing a team with Jeffrey Govelo, I think that's how you pronounce his name. Howaleu. I'm always happy to see him lose because he is such a wind-up merchant shithouse prick.
Explicit tag, hello.
Oh, yeah. Well, I could have said worse. A rock solid defender, but he's just such an asshole. And so I'm always happy to see him lose. And like I've said before, I wouldn't miss Augsburg if they somehow now did manage to get relegated. And of course, the emotions were pretty high with Alea scoring really the match winner to open it up. And then it really opened up. Yes, there were about 15 minutes that didn't look good. Let's be honest. But then Alea helped shut all of that down. So no, it was really, really good for, I would say, 75 minutes. It was perfect Dortmund.
Yeah, I must say, I was encouraged by seeing Rafael Guerreiro on the lineup sheet. I thought that for a game to break it down, a team like Augsburg, he would be the right guy. And I want to say that even though Dortmund didn't really score in the beginning, and there were a few moments where Guerreiro looked a bit comical. I remember one situation where he tried to where had a really decent run, but then instead of just passing it, crossing it into the box with his right foot, he sort of tried to have his first touch with his left foot and fell over. But I want to say in the first 20 minutes or so, I've not looked at his statistics, but I felt like he probably racked up like 4 to 5 key passes. He at least had a lot of line cutting passes, and that to me was very promising. I thought that overall Dortmund had very good ball circulation, very good switches of play to keep Augsburg running, and even more so once they sort of settled into the game after those nervy minutes you just mentioned, Lars. But I gotta say the most encouraging thing is that Dortmund, in my book, never really lost their heads in that game. Obviously, other opponents are capable of playing football and are playing well, and we have natural disadvantages like the lack of pace with Mats Hummels at the back. So it can always happen that if you ping a ball over the top from, I think the halfway line, it was sort of right next to out of bounds, just a simple ball over the top, that it can lead to a chance. It's just how Dortmund are composed, let's say. But other than that, to shut Augsburg down the way they did, Augsburg had a few corner kicks and a couple of free kicks and whatnot, but I thought Dortmund dealt with them very well. Mats Hummels put everything on the line at the very end when he took the shot to the face, which led to the substitution, of course. But overall, it is funny to see how many chances Dortmund did create, and it's also funny how different they are in taking advantage of them on the road versus at home, because I feel like if it were in the Westfalenstadion, Julian Brandt does not take a weird shot that the keeper can save. I'm pretty sure he then has the wherewithal somehow to round the keeper. Maybe I'm speculating a little bit too much here, but there were certainly a lot of good chances to decide the game much sooner. But as you said, Lars, I think it just needs to be highlighted. Edin Terzic said after the game that having Sebastian Aller is a miracle, and that he buys the team seconds and improving everyone around him. But when he took that miscontrol of Bauer, the center back that replaced Udukai, and then slotted it home, I thought that was just a really incredible moment of brilliance, because I don't think many strikers can slot it home like this, right between the keeper and just to hit the inside post. It was really a pinpoint finish, and once he controlled the ball the way he controlled it, it was impossible to defend, in my opinion. And that moment of class made the difference for Dortmund in that moment, and makes me really happy for Sebastian Aller, and the way that he is playing currently is awesome. And you can also see that, there is of course still a lot of room for improvement, but nevertheless, for him to be the guy almost a year after he, had this horrible diagnosis is an amazing story in itself. And if Dortmund win it or not, this story will always remain, but obviously crowning it with a championship would be even better. To state the absolute obvious. But it's also nice to see this team with the fullbacks of Marius Wolf and Andreasson to be this dominant, because I thought that both had quite key parts to play in this game, to keep Augsburg chasing and to not cough up possession a lot. And I think Dortmund did that really well. It's nice to see a team now with structure and, having several game plans and executing different ones throughout the game and adapting to the situation. And I think in that regard, the drop points in Stuttgart certainly helped Dortmund this time around, because I think they learned very much so from that situation and had a much better plan in keeping the ball away from Augsburg for really large stints. And you could see that Augsburg were tired. And we must not forget that Augsburg are relegation threatened, since Mainz got pounced 4-1 by Stuttgart in their own stadium, nonetheless. So to me, that was a really grown-up, really mature performance, and you know how jittery it can get when you are playing for the championship. All the pressure, even if it's positive pressure, you feel players tighten up and things go awry very quickly, but Dortmund kept their focus for the most part. And I think Lars, you said on Twitter there was championship winning like Meisterlich or something like that, right? And I would agree that Dortmund just looked like a team that knows what they were doing, which is something that we couldn't say a lot this season. And to me, that is very, very nice. Now, Matthias, obviously, there are a lot of things about this game that we still can talk about. But I think most importantly, we can talk about the self-belief this team exudes. I think Nico Schlotterbeck, when he went into the catacombs after the game, says, now we're going to do it. Now we're going to, become the champions or something along those lines. Do you think that the team, obviously they still have to prove it on Saturday, but, looking at what's there to look at, do you think this team absolutely has the fortitude to get the job done on Saturday?
Well, yeah. This was kind of the match of the ones remaining that I was initially most nervous about, simply because it's away from home, and we know Dortmund have not been great this season away from home as far as the results go. And it was Augsburg, a team that has just been problematic for Dortmund away from home for a while. And to see that they didn't just not give up, they continued with their focus. They continued getting shots on target. That was one of the issues previously was, if we look at the Bochum match and so on, they were getting plenty of shots and chances, but they weren't forcing a ton of saves from Riemann. He made a few crucial ones, but Kubek was put under way more pressure in this match. And I think that focused their attention. Yeah, there was that dip after Aller's first goal where Augsburg started to threaten, but it wasn't too extreme. I mean, Kobel had to make one save.
One very good save, but yeah,
but
just
a very
one
good save. But it's still, I mean, that's why you have him. Even peak, ultra powerful Bayern under Guardiola or Hansi Flick or whatever, Neuer still had to also make those types of saves in these types of matches, because you're playing a higher risk system against a team that is just going to hit long balls and rush at you, and then that can happen. So I'm not discounting that, but it's still something to keep an eye on. But that really kind of focused them again, because obviously the narrative that was being spun was hearkening back to the Stuttgart match. It's kind of like the first half of the season, nobody could get through a Dortmund match without somebody bringing up Bremen. And now it was Stuttgart, but that's been banished now. That's gone. That's over. And I don't think anybody doubts Dortmund's prowess at home, especially this season, especially this second half of the season. And so, Mainz, I expected more from Mainz against Stuttgart. They looked okay, and then they fell apart, and Stuttgart really blew them away. And that was in Mainz, I believe, even. And so their season has spun out. Mainz's season is like, whoop, that's gone. And so I don't think they're going to come into this as focused as they would have been with a victory. And Dortmund are ultra focused. And they showed that in the previous home matches where they blew away teams. You look at Wolfsburg, where we thought, ooh, who knows how this could go? Well, they completely destroyed them. They destroyed Gladbach. And so I think that theme will continue going here. They did it to Union Berlin as well. So I have zero doubts. I have no doubts. This was the doubt match, really, on paper with history behind it. And I like I said, when Alea scored that goal, I almost, destroyed my vocal cords in that moment. That's when I realized just how tense I was, because obviously the later it was getting, the more the commentators would mention how much later it's getting, and you just build up that tension because it's like, gosh, not Augsburg, not this one, not here, please, we got to get that goal. And then when Alea scored a great goal, a difficult goal, that's when you knew it was just going to happen. I mean, I felt confident Dortmund were going to win, but as the game was progressing, obviously the tension just keeps building.
Well, I hope I don't put the biggest hex on us now, but I did tell you beforehand, Matthias, when I read so many Twitter comments of, oh, how are Dortmund going to blow it this time, is that, no, I don't think Dortmund are going to blow it. To the opposite, I think winning is actually still in our DNA. I have seen several titles being won. When Dortmund won it against Nuremberg, I've been in the stadium. I know how it feels, and this winning culture permeates the club, if you will. There are other clubs or franchises, maybe even in Philadelphia, who knows, that don't have that certain winning culture, whatever you want to call it, the special juju. But I think Dortmund has it. We're not a loser team. We're not a loser club like Schalke, who are about to get relegated. So alone from that standpoint, I was relatively positive. But obviously, if we're honest, Dortmund already could have wrapped it up had they not dropped points in Bochum, Stuttgart, etc., etc. But nevertheless, I thought once Bayern lost, or had they drawn, doesn't matter. I do think they will absolutely win against Mainz on Saturday, 100%. But Lars, I don't want to divorce from the Augsburg game just yet, because first of all, I need to say that I had a little Rosicki moment against Hamburg when Alea scored the second goal, because I certainly celebrated before the ball was in the net, even though we all know that sometimes having the open net is the hardest one to score. And of course, also should not go unmentioned that Julian Brandt put his name on the score sheet very late in stoppage time, where also, once again, Dortmund played very well to just kill the clock and then score on top of that. So nicely done. Also, Schlotterbeck, shout out for that ball-winning moment. But Lars, what I wanted to ask you about, or talk with you about, is the Emre Can moment. When he was shoved around, I forgot by what player it was. I don't know if he was on the yellow already or not, but Emre Can to just walk away smiling and not headbutt with the player that is provoking him, to me, is really one of the moments that shows his growth as a player. How did you observe that situation? And is it something that we should take note of?
First of all, he was booked already, which I think informs what happened, because obviously even a sometimes hot-headed player like Can knows it's best not to get suspended for the final match day of the season when you can clinch the championship. He was provoked by, I'm pretty sure it was Demirovic. Yeah, I mean, I didn't necessarily expect him to, go full on, like when he had a clinch with Neymar in the Champions League a couple of years back. I think we are beyond that point with Can. I kind of jokingly called it character growth on Twitter and got more than 1,000 likes. I think a lot of people took that a bit more serious than I intended it to be. I mean, I think we don't have to go too far in praising a player for not getting sent off in that situation. But obviously we know that Can, as I said, hot-headed at times. Perhaps there's an alternate universe or a time in his Dortmund career when he would have been sent off in that situation.
Especially after getting repeatedly shoved. It wasn't just one moment, it was like 2 or 3.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying we don't need to praise him too much. Obviously, he deserves a level of praise for keeping calm, and definitely the big smile on his face was quite funny. Just because he has a different side to him as well. I mean, he's that sort of aggressive leader, as Ottmar Hitzfeld would probably call it. And by the way, I think if Dortmund clinch the championship on Saturday, there's a decent case to be made that Can is one of the major reasons why. Just because of his resurgence in the second half of the season. But yeah, a funny moment, but I wouldn't, make too much out of it.
Fair. All right. Let's move on then. The match on Saturday, 3:30 p.m. kickoff local time at the Westfalenstadion. When it comes to the injury news, obviously Jude Bellingham is hopeful to be fit in time. Sebastian Kehl said today that he will be in the matchday squad in some capacity, but, didn't promise that he would be in, healthy enough to start, so I'm not quite sure. Other than that, I've not heard of any problems from the last game. I think that Mats Hummels will have recovered, and we, of course, still have to talk about his contract extension. Matthias, considering the situation how it is right now, do you believe that Terzic will copy and paste from the Augsburg game when it comes to his team sheet?
I mean, that depends on Bellingham. If Bellingham is ready to go, I expect him in midfield again, Guerreiro at left back, and Riasson at right back. That is really the only change I would foresee, depending on Hummels' state, even though comments are that, or reports are, he's fine. I mean, he got kicked in the face. Fine is always relative in a situation like that. But we'll have to keep an eye on that. No pun intended. If Bellingham isn't fit to go, you just rinse and repeat. I wouldn't make major changes. The only change, like I said, is Bellingham in, and then that Guerreiro Riasson shuffle, and then Wolf is on the bench. That's your strongest team right now, and you may as well go in with your strongest team and then adjust if you need to.
Lars, any counterpoints?
Just that it's very unlikely, given what we have heard today from Sebastian Kehl and media reports, that Bellingham is available for actual selection. I think Kehl basically promised that he'd be in the matchday squad just because he deserves it, which I think I would not necessarily be the greatest fan of, but then again, with 20-man matchday squads, it probably doesn't really matter. So it seems unlikely that Bellingham will be able to go for more than maybe a short substitute appearance. So from that perspective, and agreeing also with what Matthias said, basically the 11 has found itself, or rather it's kind of a 12, because you don't know what's going on with the fullback situation depending on Bellingham's availability. I think the team kind of selects itself at this point of the season. There's really no reason why anything would change. I think there's probably a number of fans who would say Marco Reus needs to start because it's his big moment and whatever. But I think what the last few months have shown is that Dortmund are not giving out gifts to players or whatever. They are just a well-oiled machine almost at this point of the season, and there's no need to tinker with that too much. So I think it's going to be the same 11 unless there's a surprise with Bellingham, and then subs going from there.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, one big positive, at least in my book, even though I have not watched every Mainz game, but one of the key players I want to say is Ludovic Jorg. He, I think, was a winter signing. He came on against Dortmund when Dortmund won in Mainz, and he caused us a lot of trouble in those 20-ish minutes or however long he played. And I want to say that overall he played pretty well. I'm not quite sure if he scored against Bayern, but I do remember when Mainz beat Bayern that he also played a role in that, maybe with flick-on headers and so on. Maybe even a player that I could see as a Modest replacement if it's feasible. I have no idea, to be honest, but I think he would be a pretty good addition to Dortmund squad systematically. But the point I'm making is I think he is suspended because in the final minutes against Stuttgart he actually picked up a yellow card. And it was sort of fist pumping when I learned that, because to me that might make a big difference about how lethal Mainz are going into this. Now, obviously, Mainz for long stretches were the second best team of the second half of the season, especially after the Bayern win. But then, of course, as we all know, they had a 4-game losing streak. Starting in Wolfsburg, then they lost 3-2 to Schalke, and a 3-0 loss to Frankfurt, and they just got shellacked by Stuttgart, and they really have nothing left to play for. So, Lars, obviously, these games may never be as straightforward as we all hope they are. I mean, Ilkay Gündoğan had to come on for Manchester City a season or so ago to clinch a title on the final match day or whenever it was. Was it against Wolverhampton? Can't even remember these things. But more importantly, what can we expect of this Mainz team? What, if anything, still could make them dangerous to Dortmund's championship ambitions?
I think the first thing we have to mention is the Bayern curse, which incidentally might keep Schalke up, because all the teams who beat Bayern in the next few games usually lose over the last few years in the Bundesliga. And now, as you said, Mainz losing 4 on the spin after beating Bayern, Leipzig beating Bayern, and now playing Schalke on Saturday. So,
I
mean, Schalke can still get relegated if they win. So there's a silver lining in everything. As for Mainz, they have very little to play for, and sometimes that's all a team needs to pull one out of the hat.
Well, Kiel said that they have nothing to lose.
Yeah, I mean, there's literally nothing particularly negative that can happen for Mainz. I think their league position is relatively secure. I don't have the entire mid-table in front of me, but they won't lose, more than a couple of positions, I suppose. Which is important only in terms of TV money. Mainz don't have a chance anymore to qualify for European football. And that can make a team like that dangerous because, a team that beats Bayern obviously has a level of quality to it that, if underestimated and not taken seriously and whatever, can endanger Dortmund. I think, obviously, the circumstances are the more difficult opponent, if you like, for Dortmund on Saturday. I think it doesn't, outside of the Bayerns, Leipzigs, and whatever, the absolute best teams in the league, I think it doesn't even really matter who's the opponent on the final match day of the season when you can clinch the title. I think it's more about the circumstances. The weight of the occasion might be something that we see more of on the final match day of the season than in Augsburg, because in Augsburg there might be a little voice inside your head that always goes, well, if this doesn't go well, we can still hope Bayern drop points on the final match of the season, which, by the way, I wouldn't be surprised at all, because Cologne, same position basically as Mainz, but they've actually been really good in the last few weeks and have shown, even after clinching Bundesliga survival, as it were, that they are quite dangerous. So I wouldn't be surprised if Dortmund don't even need to win against Mainz, which would kind of be a funny way to end the season if both teams were to drop points at the on the final match day, because there were times during the season when Bayern dropped so many points to allow Dortmund back into it that people were talking about what we call in Germany sometimes a Schneckenrennen, which is a snail's race, because I think Dortmund could win the title with 74 points or whatever. How many do they have now? 70, 73? I don't know. So
they have 70 right now, so 73 max.
Yeah, and 70 could be enough. And if you look at the last few years, I mean, a lot of the times Bayern had 70 points by mid-March or whatever. So that would be a funny scenario. But in all honesty, I think it's not about anything Mainz do. It's all about how Dortmund cope with the situation. And I reserve the right to have a little bit of pessimism in my life. So when you both said 100% convinced of a title earlier, I'm not going beyond 85, I think.
All right, fair enough, Lars. I think some realism is, it's football. It's a low-scoring game. A lot of nonsense can happen. We obviously do have to account for that. I was more talking about how I feel about it rather than what I actually do think. But nevertheless, I'm looking at the second half of the season table right now. Die Rückrundentabelle in German. And man, Dortmund's second half of the season actually outscores Bayern's first half of the season with one game to go, because in the first half of the season, Bayern had 51 goals. They conceded 15. They had a goal difference of plus 36. And they have also scored 36 points in that time frame. And Dortmund now already with one match day to go sit on 39. Obviously in the first half of the season, Dortmund only had, in quotation marks, 31 points, which just really goes to show what a turnaround it was for Dortmund in the second half of the season. And I think Dortmund score, I think 2.5 points or so on average almost with Sebastian Aller on the pitch versus not even 2 without him on the pitch. So obviously he is a ginormous difference maker. But, I've read a lot of tweets, opinions, whatnot, of how undeserved this championship is. And yeah, obviously it would be the lowest point scoring championship since 2009 or 10 or something like that. But that all being said, Dortmund have scored 50 goals now in the second half of the season. They have been absolutely flying, and obviously they have been getting results. But if we watch the games against Gladbach or Wolfsburg or now even Augsburg, I just want to say this team is really fun to watch, regardless of whether they win a championship or not. It's just fun to watch, and it's nice to see now with Aller in the form that he is in, what sort of the plan was for this team when they sort of drew it up on the drawing board. Because I don't know about you, but Matthias, but I now clearly understand the vision and the, killing opponents with the speedy wingers and having Julian Brandt add to the whole creativity, be it in the center or when he's, rotates over to the left or right. I don't know. To me, it feels like a very well-balanced team right now, and especially offensively. I think Terzic has managed to create a team that just steamrolls opponents on the regular now, which wasn't always the case, especially in the first half of the season. People were asking how Dortmund would ever score a goal, and now it looks just so entirely different. So maybe talk a little bit about that development over the course of the season.
Well, I was one of those who hated the break or the Qatar World Cup that it was set in November. And in retrospect, that's the best thing that could have ever happened to Dortmund. Because if Dortmund would have still had to play another month before the traditional winter break, I think we would be talking about Bayern as Bundesliga champions already. Because that was really Dortmund at its lowest low. Sebastian Aller was not playing yet. That long winter break really helped the team, both players but also staff, kind of sit back and reevaluate things and have Sebastian Aller come into the side. And that was really the catalyst. It also helped players like Malen and Adeyemi and so on kind of just learn more about what they need to do. And Terzic and his team learn more about what they need to do. I think we can't underestimate the importance of that very long break for Dortmund. And conversely, I think it was probably not conducive to Bayern's season at that point because they were on a pretty good roll. But that being put aside, I've seen the same comments as far as, Dortmund are only champions because Bayern had such a bad first half of season. Well, these are the kind of people I would say, well, it's only still a title race on the last match day because Dortmund had a bad first half of the season. You've alluded to this a few times. If Dortmund would have just been marginally better in the first half of the season, Dortmund probably would have wrapped up the Bundesliga title last weekend or the weekend before that. If they wouldn't have done the dropping points against Schalke, Bochum, and Stuttgart, they would have wrapped it up, 2 or 3 weeks ago at that rate. So all of those comments, and I've even seen people who call themselves Dortmund fans saying things like that. It's just ridiculous because nothing happens in a vacuum in the sport. Yes, Bayern needed to drop points. We can't forget Dortmund were sitting, 7th? Pre-World Cup break. They needed a huge run, and everybody ahead of them had to start slumping for this to happen. Well, I didn't think Terzic would find lightning in a bottle twice, because we can't forget he's done this before at Dortmund when he took over for Favre in a completely abject, demoralized Dortmund side. I remember all his, Dortmund mentality stuff. And it took a while for him to find his feet and the team to find his feet, turned it around, had a huge run, qualified for the Champions League, and won the DFB Pokal. So it's not like this hasn't happened before under Edin Terzic. It has. So I think it's completely deserved. And I think it would be good if they find this form maybe a little sooner next time. But that being said, Aller, he is so incredibly important to this offensive output. It's not just a miracle, it's obviously incredibly important. And so I'm happy for both the player and the team and for Terzic as well.
Yeah, last we have a question on that sort of subject from Derek Dickens, who asks, what do you guys think was the most important factor in the turnaround after the World Cup break?
I mean, it's kind of in the question. I agree with Matthias. It was the break in itself. Because when you remember back, the 2 games immediately ahead of the World Cup break were defeats, and quite bad ones, against Wolfsburg and Gladbach. Even just 2 or 3 more games before a normal winter break, I think would have put Dortmund entirely out of reach of where they are now. So the entire complexion of the season changes because quite possibly Bayern don't change managers if the Bundesliga looks locked up by whenever Nagelsmann was sacked, and Tuchel has a worse record at Bayern than Nagelsmann, not necessarily making a comment about quality of either manager, but just saying facts. But if we go beyond that in itself, I think you can't really look past the winter signings or quasi-signings. So Riazon injecting mentality, if we are allowed to use the word, because I don't think you would necessarily say Riazon injected a lot of quality per se into the team, but he's definitely been a net positive with his attitude, his way of playing. And then you had the quasi signing of Sebastian Haller because he obviously wasn't available before January, and he's changed the entire complexion of attacking play for Dortmund. Gradually, I would say. I think the first few matches, there was definitely a grace period because he came back from literal cancer, because he definitely wasn't playing particularly well, as, you know, how could he have? So obviously he's gotten a lot better, and I think there's a point to be made that the summer break comes at a bad time for him almost, because on the one hand he can definitely use some time in the training room and lifting weights and whatever, but I think from a playing perspective he's gotten back to some level of strength. He's obviously on a good scoring run, so I think if the season went on for another month or so, I think Haller would definitely end up with, 15, 16 goals, which is a very respectable return, even without missing half a year fighting for your life, basically. So that's another factor. I think I mentioned earlier, Emre Can feels almost like a new signing for the winter window. Obviously, he was
certainly not the player anymore that I wanted nothing to do with. That's for sure.
I mean, he's been here for a while now, but outside of the first few months under Favre, when he first signed from Juventus, we haven't seen this version of Emre Can ever at Dortmund. And I think, as I said before, you could easily convince me that he's actually Dortmund's player of the season. If Karim Adeyemi can win Rookie of the Year in the Bundesliga after half a year, why shouldn't Emre Can win Player of the Season for Dortmund? And also, kind of adjacent to Haller's insertion into the starting lineup, I think a very easy sort of tactical switch, which I think a lot of us were clamoring for, but for whatever reason they didn't do it, was just switching sides with both wingers. I think I can somewhat remember episodes we did in autumn, or maybe ahead of the World Cup break or whatever, that nobody understood why Adeyemi was being played on the right when he's clearly more comfortable on the left, and why Marlon was playing on the left when he's basically good either way. But
yeah, Derek, to answer your question, the biggest impact was the Yellowwallpod and Ian Tesic finally listening to us. That really is what won it.
I mean, as it should be, Stefan.
Yeah, of course.
I
But
think
there's actually one more question here that sort of goes into this. Doris is asking, how big was the impact of the assistant coach Armin Reutersahn? Nobody talks about his role, but you hardly see him, and does he stay? Obviously, another good question, but maybe about his impact now. Obviously, it's very hard to gauge what his real impact is, but I want to say this because we obviously talk a lot about Haller and his turnaround, but I feel like, especially in the first weeks after the World Cup break, we were also carried a lot by our set-piece threat that was newly found, and that credit mostly goes to Armin Reutersahn, because he was sort of the set-piece minister, if you want. And especially in the beginning of that period, that's probably the most palpable thing that we can point to. Maybe the switch of wingers was also his idea. Obviously, I have no idea, but it certainly has to be measurable somewhere, somehow, Lars.
if it is, it isn't for me. I honestly have no idea about the work split. I just want to say that Peter Hermann, who had to leave the club for medical reasons in the winter, is an absolutely legendary assistant coach. So I very much doubt that him leaving left a net positive in any way. I think with these assistant coaches, it's more about what they're actually allowed to do, how much of a say they have, and not necessarily, the quality of coaching, because they are all... I would put money on a lot of these assistant coaches being actually better tacticians than their head coaches, but not necessarily having the personality or the want to even to stay in the spotlight all the time and be under pressure all the time. So quite possibly Reutersahn is a hidden reason for the would-be championship, but I think it's basically impossible for us to say.
Yeah, so Matthias, there's another question. Lukas Scheuer wants to know, how does your current excitement / nervousness compare to the last time BVB was in a position to win the league? I don't know if we talk about the Favre run or the last time Dortmund sort of actually clinched it. I don't know. I'll let you choose how you want to answer.
Yeah, I mean, the Favre run was kind of odd because Dortmund were so far ahead at one point. I mean, basically it's the reverse roles right now.
As Niklas Süle is quick to point out.
Yeah. And it just fell flat. I mean, I wasn't like, oh my God, Dortmund can win the title. It's, I'm a lifelong scarred Boston Red Sox fan. And as such, I always said, until the Yankees get knocked out of the playoffs, the Yankees can win the World Series. And that's kind of how I've always felt about Bayern. So that one kind of falls away. The double season under Klopp, I don't know. That whole season, I just felt a lot of confidence. It was different. The first Klopp title win was huge, given the backstory of what happened in 2005. And it was such a young group, and it was very unexpected at the beginning of the season. Nobody saw that one coming at all. And then to do it, and just the celebrations, I think we all remember, Neven Subotic shirtless jumping on top of a car scene. And then, the only other one that I can really compare that to as far as Bundesliga title comes is the first one under Hitzfeld as a teenager, because I had never experienced Dortmund winning a Bundesliga title. The last people who experienced Dortmund winning a title in that sense, aside from the one DFB Pokal in my family, are like my dad or my grandfather back in the 60s and 50s. So this comes really, really close to those two, simply because, it's been 10 years of Bayern dominance, aside from one little blip there under Favre. But even then, they seemed so comfortable. But then you combine it with all these other things that come in there. Obviously, Terzic plays into that. He's local. You don't really get that often anymore. And that means something. Sebastian Aller, that means something. Honestly, it plays into the fact that, they could win the Bundesliga title the year after letting Erling Haaland, having him leaving, where everyone was like, now what? Well, Sebastian Aller, if he would have been, like Lars said, not fighting for his life for half of the season, I think Dortmund could have done this much, much sooner. So it's close to the first Klopp and first Hitzfeld title, but not quite, because those were special in their own right. But still, it's pretty high because, for my kids, this is more or less their first Bundesliga title that they get to watch and remember. I mean, my son was alive for the two Klopp ones, but he was, an infant and a toddler, so he has no memories of it. So this is it does rank special because I get to share it with my kids for the first time. So it's not in the bag yet. That. It's for no, but we get to experience this together. They haven't experienced a Dortmund title run. Yeah, and so that definitely adds something special to it.
Lars, I don't know if you know this from the top of your head. I certainly haven't looked it up, but I'm just curious. Do you know, since you just wrote a book called Unnützes Wissen über Borussia Dortmund, do you know if Dortmund have clinched a title one of the last 8 or so on the final match day, or have those always been decided beforehand? Because I just don't know if there was one, which one it would be.
I mean, you definitely know, Stefan, you've just forgotten, because 2002...
Ah, yeah, Everton. Yes.
I don't even have to say more, right? I mean, that title, I think 95, was also clinched on the final match day. That's one of my earliest experiences or memories, rather, of actually watching Dortmund, because back in those days, not a lot of people had the pay TV channels you need to watch Bundesliga football live.
What was it called? Premiere?
Premiere, yeah. So there was a family friend or friends of my parents who invited us for both the 94 and the 95 title clinching games, but 94 I was too young, I was 4 years old. 95
so
I
much
barely
older.
remember. Yeah, but that's the kind of time where you start forming
Consciousness.
more lasting memories, I suppose. But the obvious comparison, I think, is to 2002, also because back then it kind of looked like Leverkusen had it basically in the bag, and then they fumbled the bag, which is the Leverkusen way of doing things, on the final few match days, and Dortmund came from behind. Actually, I think in 2002 there was a three-way race on the final match day, and if memory serves, Bayern actually scored first against, I want to say, Rostock. I think it was an own goal by a Rostock player, and that meant at the time, I think anyway, that Bayern were ahead for a couple of minutes, and then obviously came down to Dortmund versus Leverkusen in a Fernduell, as we say in German, and then obviously the title clinching goal by Everton. The entire sequence, I think, plays out in a lot of fans' imaginations. I think that's the obvious comparison, because actually the club championships, the first one was so surprisingly dominant. I think they clinched very early on, and even the double winning season was also not super stressful at the end of the year. I think it was more about the cup final against Bayern back in 2012, and that's also kind of the comparison I would make now. Actually, the circumstances, it feels to me like somewhat similar to a cup final or a Champions League final or whatever, because that's 10 years ago on the day, or might have been yesterday. Just because win and you're it, you don't have to worry about the other team. That is somewhat similar, I would say, to a cup final situation. So that's more the comparison that I would make.
Well, minus that the direct opponent doesn't play you, so you actually don't have to worry about them this time. Yeah, when Dortmund clinched it the second time on the club, the 2-0 win against Gladbach, that felt also very much like a foregone conclusion. I don't even remember what match day it was we clinched it. It might have been with 2 or 3, maybe even 4 rounds to spare. I don't know. It was ridiculously early. Obviously, back then there was pre-Pep Guardiola, so it was actually a record-breaking points tally with 81 points in the end. That at that point, was a Bundesliga record, as I just said. Obviously, since eclipsed by Bayern Munich, but I think even the very next year. But still, for that team, it felt like a foregone conclusion. It felt like destiny. There were very few question marks around it, and especially I remember, when Shinji Kagawa scored, and obviously Jürgen Klopp having that run on the sideline, slipping and then being caught by Kagawa, while I think once again having a hamstring tearing celebration, as he so often did. That game felt very much not nervous, but obviously, like I said in the beginning, I was in the stadium when Dortmund won it against Nuremberg, which I think was also the penultimate match day, or 1 or 2 even to spare, when they clinched it, where it was, of course, Cologne who helped Dortmund by beating Leverkusen in Cologne, and of course 1-0 in Köln and 2-0 in Köln. These, just earth-shattering shouts by Nobby Dickel live in every Dortmund's fans' hearts and minds. But to talk about that game real quick, and that day, that was probably the most nervous energy I've felt, because that team, as you just said, Lars, was a very young team. They did not have any title clinching experience, really. It's a little bit different now, because we, of course, do have more experienced players with Hummels and so on the team that have done it before. Niklas Süle, obviously, as well, and Emre Can, I think, has won domestic titles and so on and so forth. I think Sebastian Aller has won it with Ajax, if I'm not mistaken. But more importantly, the nervous energy in that game in 2011, I mean, it was against Nuremberg. Nuremberg had also, I don't know, they didn't really put much up of a fight, but they sort of did park the bus, and Dortmund were just very tight, very tense, and took forever until we scored. And, once it was 2-0 and we knew the game, the result in Cologne, it was just, just playing the ball around, passing it around. There wasn't really much of a flow to the game anymore. and it felt like the football itself didn't matter. It was just about bringing the clock down. So yeah, I love to remember that game because it was so serene and so surreal, and it was not serene. And we do have a question here. Damn, I can't find it. There it is. It's from Maxinio on Twitter, and he asked, "Will this be the best atmosphere in the Westfalenstadion that has been since Klopp?" Matthias, do you think that will be the case? Because I do remember that game in 2011, and I've been to the Westfalenstadion a lot of times, especially professionally. I don't recall it ever being that loud on that day. So my honest question would be probably answer.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say for sure, obviously. But yeah, because it's the most meaningful home match since Jürgen Klopp left, for sure. I mean, in 10 years, there hasn't been a more meaningful home match than this one. You know, it's not like Dortmund could have won a DFB Pokal at home or a Champions League at home, but they can win the Bundesliga at home. So yeah, it's the most meaningful one since then. And I would expect it's going to be the most loud and passionate and raucous one since then as well. Yeah. Lars, do you expect a Platzsturm if Dortmund clinch it after the game, where people flood the field pretty much with the full-time whistle?
I think authorities will be on the lookout for that stuff. I think they've basically announced that it's not going to be allowed, but obviously in terms of or in the interest of safety, if the floodgates are stormed, if you like, they will be opened. So I wouldn't necessarily be shocked, but I don't really know. And to be quite honest, I'm not sure I will even take anything in if they clinch the title from the moment the game is whistled off to sometime on Sunday. And I the only thing I know about my weekend plans is I'm going to be drunk as hell either way.
Yeah, someone has been asking how much we were drinking and if we had any advice for traveling fans. Oh yeah, one last point I actually wanted to make of what you just said, Matthias, is obviously this is a special championship for so many of our listeners because, as you said, it's the first championship for a lot of international Dortmund fans who fell in love with this club post the Champions League final run. Some even much later in 2015, 16, etc. So whole new territory for a lot of people listening. Something we obviously should acknowledge. It's nice that we in our lives have witnessed it so often, but not everybody has. So, and of course, if you have offspring to celebrate it with them, shout out to Adam Dorowski, sorry, who of course said that he is very happy to enjoy it with his kids for the first time. And yeah, these are very nice stories. I am looking forward to hearing more about. But yeah, if I can give you some personal advice, if you're in Dortmund, first of all, there is a bit of I don't want to call it scandal, but something that of course is a bit disappointing, that there's nothing that we Germans call public viewing. The Friedensplatz usually in the city center is where there would be a big video screen where there'd be a gathering to watch the game, but the rights holder Sky have said that they're not going to allow that to happen because they want to ensure that the pub owners basically get their dollars, which is a little bit annoying, and I don't really think is sensible. I absolutely would have a public viewing at the Friedensplatz or Hansaplatz or wherever. But of course, if you're asking me what to do on that day in Dortmund, if you don't have a ticket, I don't want to say you're on your own, but obviously there are a lot of bars where you can go to, but I can already tell you that it's going to be really, really full, and it's going to be really difficult to really watch the game somewhere. Maybe a secret shot could be the West Park. because that's not that far away from the stadium, and the weather is supposed to be nice. That's where I watched the Champions League final, and there will be some video screens as well, and all around quite nice there if you don't really if you can do with the smell of wheat. And unlike Lars, I would actually recommend to not drink that much, but rather take in the moments, and especially the next day if you're there for the title parade. Obviously being drunk is nice and fun and whatnot, but try to remember these things and not knock your lights out. And of course, very importantly, do it for me. Just go to Wurstwilli and enjoy a nice currywurst, because that's certainly what I am craving right now and can't. So please do that. That's even if the lines are long, have patience. And otherwise, I think in the city center, every bar will be showing the game. So just make sure you find a spot and keep it. Matthias, I don't know if you have any other advice, knowing that you yourself have been in Dortmund a few times as well, but I don't really have any major points right now.
Don't get too drunk, if you're not from Dortmund and you don't speak the language, safety, you always have to keep that in mind. There are places in Dortmund that are not savory. So, but aside from that, if you are going to be there, have a good time, enjoy it, soak it up. And like Stefan said, maybe not get pass out drunk, because this is kind of a cool experience. A nice buzz is always okay then, if you're going to go that route. If you don't drink alcohol, it's even better.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say.
Hummels?
Fuck. I totally forgot about it. Yes, Hummels. Yes, he has extended his contract for another season, which, of course, is huge, because I've had a phone call with a friend the other day, and we were sort of asking ourselves how Dortmund were going to replace Hummels. Should he retire? And it didn't feel like an easy, obvious answer. So in my book, considering that Mats Hummels is in a really good form right now, and there's no World Cup in between or other big tournament, I think he can conserve some of that form. And obviously, going forward, I think he will not be an automatic starter in 100% of the game, but a very great player to have around. Lars, since you remembered, unlike other hosts of this podcast, what are your thoughts on him extending?
I'm reasonably surprised, because when you watched him react after the game, celebrating with his son and whatever, it kind of felt to me like he was taking it all in for the final few games of his career. I wouldn't have been shocked if he said, I want to end it on a high note and retired after winning the title, or maybe not winning the title on Saturday. But obviously his signature is very important. As you said, it would have been difficult to replace him. I think I wouldn't necessarily say he was the best center half of Dortmund this season, because the high marks of Schlotterbeck were fairly special and are going to get even better. But I think in terms of being a consistently good player, I think Hummels was Dortmund's number one center back this season. And that's obviously quite valuable. And he's, without any disrespect to Marco Reus, I think Mats Hummels is the most natural leader in this squad, and kind of the secret captain anyway, probably. And so keeping him around, especially on reduced wages, is quite big. And
I didn't even think of the reduced wage aspect.
Yeah, I mean, it's not our money, so ultimately it doesn't really matter. But it's not the worst to know that a player is willing to go for a bit less money to stick around. And I think even those who were against Hummels returning from Bayern a few years back, I think even those people have found new respect for him over the years. So even if I'm a Patriots fan and I'm kind of the opinion of Bill Belichick that you should always get out of a player's contract a year too earlier rather than too late, I think there's more of a nostalgia factor that makes sense in football or in soccer as opposed to the NFL, because obviously there's no salary cap. So even if Hummels and Reus were to fall off a cliff over the next year of their new contracts, doesn't really matter because you don't have a salary cap. So, but also I just don't think that's going to happen because Hummels' playing style is kind of timeless, and I think he could do this until his body completely gives up. So well, if that's 38, 39, I don't know. But I don't necessarily see a reason why Hummels shouldn't be able to put this level of performance in for another season or two. So keeping him around, kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, Matthias?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing with having him for another season is just basically ensures Dortmund have a little bit more time to find a replacement. And work in Schlotterbeck and Süle. It's good all around. It's a win-win for everybody. That's my deep analysis.
Lars, do you have any final thoughts?
However big the temptation might be, don't go onto the black market for tickets, because there's a very decent chance, especially for this game, where Dortmund could quite feasibly have sold 500,000 tickets legally, or actual tickets, that if you show up with dubious tickets, you will be turned away at the gates. And if that happens to you, you're definitely too late to get a spot in a bar anywhere around the stadium. So you might be stuck with either listening to the game on radio or whatever, or if you are German and have Sky, watching it with at least 2.5 minutes of latency on Sky Go, which would take out all the fun, because you will definitely be able to hear what happens in the game regardless of where you are, anywhere around the stadium, and I would assume anywhere really in the city center or around the city center. So even if you're incredibly rich and can afford to spend whatever amount of money on tickets on via GoGo or eBay or wherever, it's not worth it. Give that money to charity or to us, which is basically charity, but don't show up at the gates with dubious tickets, because that's going to absolutely ruin your experience. So stay legal. If it doesn't happen with tickets, there's always ways to enjoy a game even without being in the stadium. And I would also kind of say, especially if you're not local, it might not be worth it to go into Dortmund expecting too much on Saturday, because the big, if they even win the title, disclaimer, the big things are going to happen on Sunday. So especially if you are, maybe even coming in from abroad.
Well, I can guarantee you there will be auto courses, there will be mayhem on the streets if Dortmund win the title on Saturday.
But it's not the organized thing.
It's not organized, but
quite unlikely to see any of the players, because there's no Neven Subotic who's jumping on cars in just regular as roads. So if you want to have the true experience of celebrating with or adjacent to the players, Sunday is your big day, not Saturday.
Yeah, but I mean, if you just go to the city center or the Kreuzviertel, there will be parties everywhere. So I'm not.
Yeah, but not the original one, and the city have actually put out statements kind of asking people not to come into the city on Saturday, because obviously a lot of people will do anyway. So if you're not local, you don't know your way around, obviously you can just follow the masses of people in black and yellow. But still, if you can make plans and you don't have tickets for the game, it might be a better idea just to come into the town on Sunday and celebrate, instead of frantically trying to find a spot to watch a game. Because quite honestly, if you're going to any kind of bar in central areas, you might have to be very early. And even if you want to get pass out drunk on Saturday, you don't want to start on 9 a.m. because that's kind of sad.
Well, here's my thought. If people are smart enough to tune into the Yellowwallpod, I think they're sensible enough to have a good time either way, and be able to figure it out. Matthias, do you have any final closing thoughts before we embark on this nervous yet exciting journey towards Saturday?
Not really. Aside from, I hope my kids get to celebrate Dortmund Bundesliga title. That's about it.
All right, here's mine. Let's go and fucking win it.